The night fell over the small town, and the rain drummed softly against the window glass as Helena arrived. She stepped out of the taxi, gripping her suitcase firmly, and gazed at the towering Victorian mansion before her. The hall lights were on, and the silhouette of a thin woman appeared at the door. "Welcome, Helena," the woman said with a polite smile. "I am Margaret, the housekeeper. Mr. and Mrs. White are eager to meet you." Helena smiled politely and stepped inside, a chill running down her spine. There was something in the air of that house, a scent of old wood and something else. A faint, musty smell mixed with a sweet perfume. The place was luxurious, but there was something decadent about its beauty, like a portrait that, when viewed up close, reveals tiny cracks in the paint. Margaret led her to the living room, where a couple was waiting. Mr. White was a tall, thin man with deep-set eyes and a neatly trimmed goatee. His wife, Mrs. White, had delicate features, but a gaze that seemed heavy with exhaustion. "You must be Helena." "It's a pleasure to have you in our home," the woman said, shaking her hand. "Our son Benjamin is asleep. You'll meet him in the morning. He is a special boy." The way Mrs. White pronounced the word special made something twist in Helena's stomach, but she smiled and nodded. "I'm looking forward to meeting him." Margaret took her to her room on the 3rd floor. The space was simple but cozy, with an old iron bed and a dark wooden dresser. The housekeeper handed her a set of keys. "This one is for your room," she said, "and this other one is for the attic door. You don't need to worry about that. Just keep it locked. Always." Helena frowned. "The attic? Is there something up there?" Margaret only smiled, but her gaze remained serious. "Good night, Miss Helena." Once alone, Helena sighed and sat on the bed. There was something strange about that house, but maybe it was just fatigue. She would get used to it soon, she thought. But then a sound echoed down the hallway, the slow creak of a door opening, and a faint whisper coming from somewhere above her. Helena held her breath. Her heart pounded as she got up from the bed, trying to pinpoint the origin of the sound. Taking cautious steps, she approached the door and pressed her ear against it. The whisper continued, unintelligible words mixing with the wind passing through the cracks of the house. She decided it was just her imagination. She was tired from the journey, and her mind was playing tricks on her. But as she turned to return to bed, something made her stop. The light under the attic door flickered for a brief moment, as if something or someone had passed in front of it. Swallowing hard, Helena stepped back and lay down, pulling the covers over her body. "Just my imagination," she repeated to herself. But in the darkness of her room, she could still hear that persistent whisper, calling her name. That night, the feeling of being watched kept her from sleeping. With every noise, every shadow cast by the moonlight, her fear grew. Then, just past midnight, she heard the attic door creak again. But this time, it wasn't just a whisper. It was footsteps coming down the stairs. With ragged breathing, Helena got out of bed and approached the door. Her heart pounded erratically. The footsteps were slow, hesitant, as if whatever was in the attic was testing the way. Then, something scraped against the wood, a dry, scratching sound like long nails dragging across the door. Helena held her breath, and in the silence of the night she heard it clearly. "Helena!" The attic door burst open with a snap, and a cold wind swept through the hallway. Helena, paralyzed, saw a shadowy figure emerge from the darkness. Its contours were indistinct, but its eyes, those eyes, glowed with an unnatural light. Benjamin appeared in the hallway, watching her, but he didn't seem afraid. On the contrary, his face bore a macabre satisfaction. "I told you that you'd see before deciding," he murmured. The spectral figure extended a skeletal arm toward Helena. Time seemed to freeze. Helena's mind screamed for her to run, but her body wouldn't obey. Then a single thought occurred to her. This wasn't a nightmare. It was real. In the next instant, Everything went dark. The next morning, Margaret knocked gently on Helena's door. No response. Upon entering, she found the room empty, the bed neatly made, no sign of the nanny. In the attic, the dust lay undisturbed. But on the old wooden floor there was a pair of small footprints, and beside them larger steps that led to nowhere. Benjamin smiled at his parents over breakfast. "I think we need a new nanny," he said calmly. Margaret sighed and left the room. She knew that soon another young woman would answer the call of the house, and the cycle would begin again. The rain poured down in torrents as Sophia arrived at the Bellamy house. The taxi drove off quickly, leaving her alone in front of the imposing mansion atop the hill. She adjusted the strap of her bag on her shoulder and pressed the doorbell. A distant thunder rumbled, and the door creaked as it opened. An elderly woman with a rigid posture stared at her. "You must be Sophia. Please, come in." Sophia nodded, feeling a chill run up her spine. The house was a monument to the past, with dark wooden furniture and old portraits hanging on the walls. The housekeeper introduced herself as Mrs. Whitmore and led Sophia to the main sitting room where a pale, thin woman awaited her. "I'm Eleanor Bellamy," the woman said with a tired smile. "Thank you for coming. My son, Thomas, needs someone to look after him at night. He has trouble sleeping." Sophia noticed the hesitation in Eleanor's voice, but smiled reassuringly. "Don't worry, I'll do my best to help him." The housekeeper led her to a room on the second floor. "Listen, Miss Sophia, there is only one rule. Do not enter the attic room. It must remain locked. Always." The warning was clear, and Sophia felt the tension in the woman's gaze. She nodded without asking questions. That night, after putting Thomas to bed, Sophia sat in the armchair beside him and picked up a book to read. The 8-year-old boy watched her closely. "You'll hear things at night," he whispered. "But you mustn't leave the room," Sophia frowned. "Hear things? What do you mean?" Thomas turned to his side, curling under the blanket. "They tried to call you." Before Sophia could ask more, the boy closed his eyes. Silence fell over the room, but something about those words made her shiver. When midnight came, a sound echoed through the hallway. A slow, deliberate dragging, like bare feet scraping against the wooden floor. Sophia held her breath. The sound was coming from upstairs, from the attic. Her heart pounded in her chest. She remembered the housekeeper's warning, but her curiosity grew with every ghostly step that descended the stairs. She slowly got up and opened Thomas's bedroom door, peeking into the hallway. Nothing. Then, a faint whisper made her freeze. "Sophia," her name coming from upstairs. The voice was weak, almost childlike. Her instinct screamed for her to go back inside the room, but her legs carried her forward. The attic stairs seemed to stretch endlessly. When she reached the locked door, she realized it was slightly ajar. Inside, only darkness. Sophia hesitated, then slowly pushed the door open. The scent of dust and mold hit her, but there was something else, something rotten. A small child's bed sat in the center of the room, the sheets pristine. Toys were scattered around, covered in a thin layer of dust. But what made Sophia step back was the portrait on the wall, an old painting of a child. She recognized the face instantly. It was Thomas. But the eyes in the painting were empty, like black voids. And then, in the silence of the room, a whisper brushed against the back of her neck. "He is not Thomas." Sophia spun around, but the attic was empty. Her entire body trembled. Who had said that? And more importantly, if the boy in the painting was Thomas, then who was sleeping downstairs? Without thinking, she ran back to the second floor. As she opened the boy's bedroom door, she found the bed empty. A cold wind blew through the open window, the curtains swaying like specters in the dark. A shiver ran down her spine. Thomas was gone. But in the silence, the whisper returned, now coming from all directions. "He is not Thomas. He never was." The door behind her slammed shut, and everything went black. The next morning, Mrs. Whitmore knocked on Sophia's door. No response. Upon entering, she found the room empty, the bed neatly made, as if it had never been used. In the attic, Thomas's portrait looked different. Now the child's mouth bore a macabre smile, and in the hallway, the sound of bare footsteps echoed once more, waiting for the next nanny. Sophia opened her eyes, but saw nothing but darkness. She felt the cold floor beneath her body, the scent of damp wood and something metallic. She tried to move, but her arms were stiff, as if something held them in place. A creak echoed in the darkness, and a dim light flickered, a candle trembling in the shadows. In front of her, Eleanor Bellamy watched, holding the candle with trembling hands. "You shouldn't have gone into the attic, Sophia," the woman whispered. "Now, he has chosen you." Sophia tried to scream, but no sound came from her mouth. Something moved behind Eleanor. A tall shadow with hollow eyes and a grin far too wide to be human. The thing stepped closer, its bony fingers brushing against Eleanor's shoulder. "She will be perfect," the spectral voice murmured. Sophia felt hot tears slip down her face. She tried to fight, but the darkness wrapped around her like an unyielding veil. The next morning, a new housekeeper arrived at the Bellamy house. She was greeted with smiles and informed of the house rules. And in the attic, the new painting was ready. Now, beside Thomas, there was a new figure. Sophia's eyes, empty and dark, stared at the door, waiting for the next nanny. The night was cold when Clara arrived at the Lancaster house. The neighborhood was quiet, lined with old, well-kept houses. The job seemed simple. Look after two siblings, Emily and Noah, while their parents traveled for a few days. It was the perfect job for someone like her. The Lancasters welcomed her warmly. The mother, Vanessa, was an elegant woman, and the father, Richard, was serious but polite. The children, 7 and 10 years old, were adorable. Emily, the older one, had long, blonde hair and eyes far too perceptive for her age. Noah, younger, was shy, but looked at Clara with curiosity. On the first night, everything seemed normal. Clara prepared dinner, tucked the siblings into bed, and sat in the living room, listening to the silence of the house. But something felt off, a strange sensation, as if she were being watched. Around 2 in the morning, Clara woke to a noise. Light footsteps echoed down the hallway. She got up slowly and peeked through the slightly open door. Noah stood in front of his parents' bedroom, staring at the closed door. "Noah, what are you doing up?" The boy turned slowly. "Mommy said I shouldn't open the door." Clara frowned. "Your parents aren't home, sweetheart. Let's go back to bed." Noah hesitated. "She said I can't open it, no matter what. Even if she calls." A shiver ran down Clara's spine. She knelt beside him. "Who is calling, Noah?" He looked away. "The other mommy." Clara froze. "What?" Noah gripped her hand. "Sometimes she knocks and asks to come in, but she's not the real mommy." Before Clara could respond, a sharp sound echoed down the hall. Knock, knock, knock. The door to the parents' bedroom trembled under the impact. Clara held her breath. The hallway suddenly felt much colder. Noah clutched her arm tightly, his fingers digging into her skin. Knock, knock, knock. Louder this time, Clara stood up and scooped Noah into her arms. "We're going to your room, now." Emily was already standing at her bedroom door. "I heard it. She's awake tonight." "You two know what's going on?" Clara asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Emily nodded. "She always comes back when they travel. That's why Mom says we can't open the door." Clara wanted to ask more, but the silence was interrupted by something much worse. The doorknob of the parents' bedroom began to turn. Slowly, Clara stepped back, pulling the children behind her. The sound of metal scraping filled the hallway, as if someone were testing the lock. Emily took Noah's hand and whispered something under her breath. Then, a whisper cut through the air. "Noah, sweetheart, open the door for Mommy." The voice was identical to Vanessa Lancaster's. Noah whimpered and buried his face in Clara's shirt. It's not her. Clara felt her entire body go cold. She had to do something. She grabbed the children's hands and quickly led them into Emily's room, shutting the door and locking it from inside. The silence was suffocating. Then the footsteps started again, slow, dragging, moving down the hallway. Clara's heartbeat pounded as something began knocking on Emily's door. 3 solid thuds. Knock, knock, knock. This time, the voice was clearer, just outside the door. "Clara, I know you're in there." The sound of the doorknob turning made Clara press herself against the wall. Emily and Noah huddled together on the bed. The door, though locked, began to tremble, as if something was trying to force it open. Then, suddenly, the noise stopped. Only silence. Clara held her breath, waiting, listening. Nothing. She hesitated, then slowly moved closer to the door, pressing her ear against it. The moment she did, something slammed violently against the other side, sending her stumbling back with a gasp. "You can't keep me out forever," the voice whispered. Emily clutched Clara's arm tightly. "By morning she'll be gone. She always is. We just have to wait." Clara looked at the children, feeling cold sweat trickle down her back. But what if, this time, she didn't leave? The hours dragged by, agonizingly slow. Despite their fear, the children eventually fell asleep, curled up together on the bed. Clara stayed awake, sitting on the floor, eyes fixed on the door. No other sound came from the hallway. The silence was worse than the noise. As dawn broke, Clara realized how unnervingly still the house had become. The first rays of sunlight filtered through the window, and only then did she gather the courage to unlock the door. She opened it slowly, peering into the hallway. Empty. Taking a deep breath, she picked up Noah and took Emily's hand. "Let's go downstairs and wait for your parents. It's okay now." The 3 of them walked cautiously down the corridor. Everything looked normal. The doors were closed, just as before. The smell of coffee from the kitchen made Clara pause. Had Vanessa and Richard come home early? She descended the last steps and froze. Vanessa Lancaster was standing in the kitchen, her back to them, preparing coffee as if nothing had happened. But something was wrong. Her body was too rigid, her movements mechanical. Clara felt a knot tighten in her throat. Vanessa turned slowly, and dread crawled up Clara's spine. Her eyes were completely black. She smiled. "Good morning, Clara. Did you sleep well?" Emily and Noah gripped Clara's hands tightly, saying nothing. The room felt subtly darker, despite the morning light. Vanessa tilted her head at an unnatural angle, still smiling. "I missed you." Suddenly, every door and window in the house slammed shut at once. The daylight vanished, plunging the house into deep shadow. The last thing Clara saw before everything went black was Vanessa's grin, stretching impossibly wide, revealing endless rows of teeth. Then only darkness remained.